this topic guide is absolutely brilliant. I mean, we've put it together to enable us to think so much more carefully about women and girls, particularly as an integral part of the changes that are taking place in agricultural and rural economies. And I think as we think about growth and economic development and trying to make it more inclusive, it's vitally important that we think much more carefully about women and girls. And this topic guide helps us do that. But also, I think it's really important when we talk about empowerment, what this really means for people, and particularly women, as they, work in agriculture, either as farmers, but particularly, what does empowerment mean for them when they want to step up and become more commercialised and become more engaged in value chains? Or if they want to step out of own account agriculture, and what that means about how we empower them to find wage labour. So this guide is also important because I think it highlights the need to work at in a multi-level way. So it's not just about thinking about how we help women at field level, but it's also really important to think about policy development and how we embed empowerment issues into policy thinking and implementation. So, Una, perhaps I can ask you to speak a little bit more about how this topic guide was developed and how it's been framed.
Okay, the aim of this topic guide is to provide a better understanding of gender equality and women's empowerment in a changing rural context. So we're emphasising changing and we're emphasising empowerment. There are 5 main sections in the guide. There's a section that kind of usefully unpacks jargon around gender equality and women's empowerment and some of the debates around that. Then we have a large section that looks at policy and programming from a gender perspective. And within that, we look at assets, because we know that owning and controlling assets for rural women can be very empowering. But due to space limitations, we just look at 3 types of assets. We look at land, we look at forestry resources, and we look at livestock. Another section looks at wage employment, social protection for those who are subsisting in rural areas. Social protection is sometimes very important. Another section looks at entrepreneurship and value chains and maybe moving out of agriculture or stepping up a little bit towards commercialisation and wage up and self-employment, adding value, moving up value chains. And then we have a last section which looks at monitoring and evaluation. And here we've placed some frameworks for examining or looking at indicators for empowerment.
For me, the topic guide really stands out because it highlights the fact that the context really matters. Looking at women empowerment might look similar across different countries, but actually it differs when you look at the detail, because women economic empowerment, the position really cut across different elements of life, the political economy, the socio-cultural factors, the economy. So you really need to look at the whole complex interaction. And the question for us is also, how do you address this complexity without oversimplifying the issues around economic empowerment? So the guide really highlights the fact there are no easy answers and there's no silver bullet, and it really pulls together different examples where a certain approach worked in one particular context but it didn't work in another context. So it really forces us to think, taking a step back, do a thorough gender analysis before any program design, but also doing implementation, keep checking, are we doing the right thing to promote economic empowerment? I was particularly interested in the importance of the care economy. The topic guide includes an example from Papua New Guinea where they were trying to train women in certain entrepreneurial skills, but they found that women were not able to participate in the training because they were not able to travel and participate and leave their children at home. DFID Mozambique is in the process of developing a new program working with 3 major private forest companies, and they will take into consideration the care responsibility and will integrate a childcare component into the program that will allow women to participate and attend some of the entrepreneurial skills activities as part of this program.
So for me, the topic guide was really important because it acted as a really strong reminder that women, when we talk about women's empowerment, it's not something you can physically give to a woman or a man or a person. It's something that we aim to support. Also, I found the issues that Nicoline was talking about in terms of the care economy weaved right the way through the topic guide, which I found really important. And this thing about women and men and boys and girls not being static. So sometimes we may find that something may work in a particular context for somebody at a particular point in their life cycle, but that may not be replicable in other parts or even other parts of the program, the same program. So for me, the topic guide was a very useful reminder about how different we all are.
So for me, some of the other key things coming out of this topic guide that I think are really important to share with people are the big issue around agricultural productivity, and particularly how we increase women's productivity. And I think some of the barriers around that, I mean, the provision of extension services and the link to women's particularly unpaid care work and the burden of care and how that affects her access or non-access to some of the traditional ways in which extension services have been provided. The really important thing that this topic guide also talks about is how we measure impact. How do we know that we're making a real difference for women and girls? And the topic guide signposts us to 3 or 4 really useful frameworks for helping us to think about, how we tailor the monitoring and evaluation of programs that we're designing. And maybe, Una, you can say a little bit more about those monitoring frameworks, those measurement frameworks. I think that would be really helpful.
Good question. And I do think measuring empowerment is very challenging. There's many views about measuring empowerment. You can measure empowerment quantitatively, economic empowerment in particular, quantitatively in terms of an increase in income for rural women. But sometimes qualitative indicators are more useful, more tricky to collect, and indicators defined by women themselves of what they feel increases their control in their initiatives or in their programs. But not everyone agrees that empowerment can be measured or defined, let alone measured. But in this day of results and measurements, we try to measure carefully the impact of our work. There are a number of frameworks for measuring economic empowerment, and I think the Donor Committee on Enterprise Development has done a lot of work in this area around private sector development and measuring economic empowerment. And we reference those guides in the topic guide. And I think they're very useful for looking at when you're trying to measure economic empowerment, and they have indicators.
Thanks very much, Una. That's a really good description of the evaluation and monitoring frameworks that we're signposted to in the topic guide. And I think it's a really important section for readers to look at and to consider how we can embed these issues right at the beginning in our evaluation frameworks when we're designing new policies and programs. And I think this discussion today really highlights just what an informative topic guide this is and how rich it is in the resources it offers to readers. And I'd encourage everybody to share it with our networks and really encourage colleagues and advisors to have a look at it, to dip into various sections that are more useful for them in their work at any particular time, rather than read the whole thing in one sitting. But it does offer a huge range of resources to everybody. Thanks very much, Una.
Thank you.